Surviving in HumanitZ isn't just about finding food and running from zombies. The real danger lies in the small decisions you make on autopilot, the ones that slowly ruin your run without you even noticing. I've personally lost hours of progress due to habits that seemed completely harmless. Worst of all, I only noticed some of these mistakes after a lot of playtime. So if you feel like you always die out of nowhere or can't understand why your survival never takes off, stick with me, because today we're going over 10 mistakes that are probably destroying your gameplay right now. This is one of those mistakes that seem harmless at first, but silently end your run in HumanitZ. Thirst starts to hit, you're exploring, maybe far from base, and you spot a lake right there. The natural reaction is to think it's now or die of dehydration, and that's exactly where the game punishes you mercilessly. Because drinking water straight from these sources is practically signing your own death warrant. I've fallen into this trap more times than I care to admit. At first, it even feels like you solved the problem. The thirst bar goes up and you keep playing. But a few minutes later, the real cost hits. Intestinal infection. Your character starts vomiting out of nowhere, loses energy, and worst of all, the dehydration returns even more aggressively. In other words, you tried to save yourself and ended up in a much worse cycle. The cruelest part is that the game doesn't make this obvious for beginners. It's not just a matter of water is water. HumanitZ handles this much more realistically. River or lake water is contaminated, period, and if you don't treat it, you will suffer the consequences. When this happens during a long exploration run or far from resources, it can basically end your attempt right then and there. Once you understand this, your mindset changes completely. You start planning better, carrying purification tablets whenever possible, or making sure you can boil water over a campfire. It seems like a small detail, but this is what separates those who survive for days from those who keep restarting the game without understanding why.
This is a classic mistake that many people make without realizing it, especially when they start looting everything in sight. In HumanitZ, filling your backpack to the limit gives a false sense of progress, as if you were making the most out of every trip. However, the game extracts a silent price for this excess. You keep walking, running, exploring, and you don't even notice that your hunger and thirst are draining much faster than they should. I've had several runs where everything seemed under control, but suddenly my character would become exhausted, starving, and dehydrated all at the same time. Worst of all, I didn't understand why, until I realized that the issue wasn't a lack of resources, but the absurd weight I was carrying. The more overloaded you are, the faster your stamina drains, which pulls down your food and water levels with it. The most critical moment is when things actually go wrong. A group of zombies appears, or you need to make a quick escape. If you are carrying too much weight, you simply can't. Your character won't run properly, gets tired in seconds, and becomes an easy target. That's when many players panic, when in reality, the game gives you a simple way out: dropping your backpack on the ground. It might seem counterintuitive, but pressing the key to drop everything can be the difference between escaping or dying right there. Once this clicks, you start playing much more strategically. It's not about grabbing everything, it's about knowing what is worth carrying. Most importantly, understanding that survival is worth more than any loot. Managing backpack weight becomes one of the most crucial decisions in the game, and ignoring it virtually guarantees your run will end much sooner than it should.
This mistake is practically a rite of passage. Everyone who gets a firearm early on feels that immediate rush of power, and then makes the biggest mistake possible: shooting without thinking. At first, it feels amazing. You drop a zombie quickly, you feel safe, in control, but the game doesn't immediately show you the scale of the problem you just created. Because the gunshot doesn't just deal with that one zombie, it alerts all the others. It's as if you turned on a massive alarm on the map. Suddenly, a simple encounter turns into a completely uncontrollable situation. Zombies begin to appear from every direction, and what was an advantage becomes chaos. Early in the game, you simply don't have the resources or preparation to handle a horde like that. I've lost progress this way due to misplaced confidence, thinking the gun would save me when it was actually the cause of my downfall. You run out of ammo, you run out of stamina, and before you know it, you're surrounded with no way out. It's a mistake that doesn't seem that serious until it happens, and when it does, there is usually no going back. Once you understand this, the game's pace changes completely. You learn to respect silence, melee weapons, a bow, even an improvised spear become your best friends. Eliminating enemies without drawing attention stops being an option and becomes a rule. In HumanitZ, surviving the early game isn't about strength, it's about discretion, and a single shot can destroy all of it.
This mistake is treacherous because it stems from impatience. You see a house, you immediately picture good loot, food, maybe a rare item, and you walk right in without a second thought. In HumanitZ, this impulse almost always carries a heavy price because these houses aren't empty. They just look like they are. I've lost count of how many times I walked in confidently, only to get a massive jump scare from a zombie jumping out of a bathroom or a dark corner. The game loves to hide threats where you least expect them. Worst of all, when you are in loot mode, your guard drops completely. You open your inventory, stand still, distracted, the absolute perfect moment to get caught. The problem isn't just the scare, it's the domino effect. An attack inside a house can injure you, force you to waste resources, or even make you run out in a panic. Depending on the situation, that noise or movement can attract even more zombies from the outside, turning a simple loot run into a dangerous situation very quickly. Once you learn this, your approach changes entirely. Before you even think about picking anything up, you clear the area. You go room by room, open doors carefully, and check every corner. Only after that does looting become the priority. It might seem slower, but it's exactly this kind of discipline that keeps you alive in HumanitZ.
At first, gasoline seems just like another resource, until you need to cross the map or escape a tight spot and realize the tank is practically empty. Often this happens not because of a lack of loot, but due to pure waste. I've caught myself leaving the engine running while organizing my inventory, or keeping the headlights on unnecessarily, as if it didn't matter. But in HumanitZ, every drop counts. The constant consumption drains the tank without you realizing it, and when you finally need the car for real, it simply won't respond. There's also the misuse of vehicles in combat. Running over zombies seems efficient, and it can be if done carefully, but it only takes a few poorly calculated hits or collisions with the environment to start destroying the car piece by piece. Once the engine begins to fail, it doesn't matter how much fuel you have. Your mobility goes out the window anyway. Once you grasp the actual value of gasoline, everything changes. You start treating the vehicle as a strategic resource, not something disposable. You use it only when necessary, avoid foolish waste, and drive more consciously. In HumanitZ, mobility is survival, and spending fuel thoughtlessly is one of the fastest ways to put yourself at risk. This is the kind of mistake you only learn to respect after dying a few times the exact same way. In the heat of combat, the tendency is to keep swinging wildly, trying to resolve everything with brute force. But HumanitZ does not forgive this approach. Every strike consumes stamina, and if you don't pay attention to it, you'll be completely out of breath in a matter of seconds. When stamina hits zero, the game turns against you brutally. You can't push zombies back, you can't create space, and any approach becomes a massive risk. That's when the grabs start happening. And if there's more than one enemy, the situation goes downhill fast. It's no exaggeration to say that running out of stamina in the middle of a group almost always means game over. I've been in situations where the fight was completely under control until I overextended my attacks. That was all it took for everything to collapse. Without energy, my character became an easy target, incapable of reacting. Worst of all, it was a completely avoidable mistake caused solely by a lack of pacing and control. Once you gain this awareness, combat changes completely. You begin to fight calmly, spacing out your attacks, watching the stamina bar the entire time. You learn to back off, catch your breath, and only then re-engage. In HumanitZ, the winner isn't the one who hits fastest. It's the one who knows when to stop. This mistake heavily affects players coming in with the mindset of other survival games. I need to set up my perfect base as soon as possible. In HumanitZ, this is a trap. During the first few days, you don't have enough resources, tools, or knowledge to sustain a large build. Even so, it's very easy to fall into the temptation of starting to erect something permanent too early. I've done this thinking I was playing the right way. I spent time collecting materials, organizing space, trying to secure everything, while neglecting exploration, finding better items, and actually progressing in the game. In the end, I had a mediocre base and a character completely lagging behind in progression. The problem is that the cost isn't just materials, it's time. And time in HumanitZ is progress. While you are stuck building, you're missing out on finding better weapons, essential tools, food, fuel, everything that will actually sustain your survival in the long run. It's too high an investment for a return that doesn't pay off in that initial phase. Once you change this mindset, the game flows much better. You start using what already exists on the map to your advantage. You clear a house, block the windows, turn it into a temporary shelter, and keep moving. This motel tactic significantly accelerates your progression. The permanent base comes later, when you actually have the infrastructure for it. Before that, building too much only holds you back. HumanitZ has a large map filled with details, and relying solely on memory is one of the biggest blunders you can make. You find an incredible spot, a workshop full of good parts, a station with fuel. You think, I'll come back here later, and you simply never find it again. I've experienced this multiple times. I'd find a great spot, keep exploring, and when I actually needed to head back, I'd start driving around completely lost. The result is always the same. Wasted time, wasted fuel, and resources draining away while you try to rediscover something that was already guaranteed. The most frustrating part is that this creates a chain effect. You expose yourself more, spend more food and water, and increase the chances of getting into dangerous situations just from wandering aimlessly, all because you didn't stop for 2 seconds to mark the location on the map. It's a simple mistake, but it carries heavy consequences in the long run. Once you build the habit of marking everything that matters, the game changes completely. You start playing more strategically, planning routes, returning to specific points when needed, and avoiding waste. In HumanitZ, information is a resource, and the map is one of the most valuable tools you possess. In HumanitZ, inventory space isn't just a convenience, it's pure survival. Starting without a backpack leaves you extremely limited, and this impacts everything. Looting, exploration, crafting, you simply cannot carry enough to keep yourself alive. I've tried to ignore this, focusing on other things first, and the result was always the same. I'd find food and have to leave it behind. I'd find a useful item and have no room for it. Gradually, you end up poorly equipped, lacking resources, and entering a bad cycle where you're short on everything. It's not a quick death. It's that crippled survival that slowly crumbles away. The most critical aspect is that without a backpack, you don't progress. You can't gather materials to craft, you can't carry supplies to explore further, and every decision becomes a sacrifice. Do I take food or a tool? When in reality, you should be taking both. This limitation traps you in the early game more than any zombie. Once you prioritize a backpack early on, it feels like the game truly opens up. Your looting capacity increases, you start planning your routes better, and you can finally progress with consistency. It's one of those initial investments that completely change your experience. Ignoring it is basically agreeing to play at a disadvantage the entire time. You take a hit, a bite, you see that you still have enough health left, and you decide to move on, as if it were nothing. But in HumanitZ, ignoring an injury is practically leaving a countdown timer running against you. the infection doesn't stop, and it does not forgive carelessness. I've made this mistake often, thinking, I'll deal with this later. I'd keep exploring, looting, until the effects kicked in, stat drops, overall worsening, and that feeling that the character is getting weaker and weaker. By the time I checked, the infection was already too high to handle calmly. From there, it turns into a desperate race for a cure. The detail many people ignore is that it's not just about not dying on the spot. The infection wears you down gradually, makes you less efficient, and impacts everything: combat, exploration, decision-making. When it gets close to 100%, no amount of skill can save you. A simple mistake made way back becomes a practically inevitable death. Once you learn this, your priority changes entirely. Took damage? Immediately think about treating it. Always carry bandages, medicine, or an inhibitor, and don't let them stack up. In HumanitZ, surviving isn't just about avoiding immediate death, it's about preventing small problems from turning into something uncontrollable. Ignoring an infection is exactly the kind of mistake that seems minor, right until it ends everything.